Alright guys, so our last unit here is going to be over ancient China and ancient Japan. So we're kind of sliding just a little bit to the north and east of where we've been talking about with India. With China and Japan, they're two separate countries. We're going to do all of China first, and then cover Japan. I put them together just because I want to make sure we get them finished this year. But a lot of times people get them confused and assume that they're one and the same. Nope, they're very very different. Different people, different cultures. It's actually kind of offensive to assume that they're one and the same. So, a couple things as we go through these two that I kind of want you to pick up on or notice. For one, if you look at your study guide that you got, there are 18 items on it. So there is a lot of things there on your study guide. But the other thing with it, if you're looking through some of the terms and some of the people's names, a lot of those things are probably going to be hard for you to pronounce. They're going to look a little bit different to you, just the way that they're spelled. Full disclosure, guys, even as we go through and talk about, the different names of people and the different cities and things, I'm going to mess up how they're pronounced. A lot of them are very, very difficult. Their letters, when they're translated into English, don't make the same sounds as our letters do. So just do the best you can with that stuff. Like I said, I know I'm going to pronounce them wrong. So just do the best you can when you're seeing them or maybe even trying to say them. The other thing, this is probably going to be our last formative for the year. So it is kind of the last opportunity that you're going to have to really improve your grade at all. So just kind of keep that in mind as we go through and cover some of this stuff. Now, if you look at the map here of China, you're going to see India over here to the left. But China is a fairly large country. But just like the other civilizations that we have talked about, a lot of its civilizations do start in the river valleys. There are three main river valleys through China. You have the Shang, the Yangtze, and the Jun down here. They're three separate rivers. But just like all the other civilizations that we have talked about, guys, if I were to ask you, how did the Chinese use these three rivers? All of you know the answer to that. Yes. So, trading, transportation, food source, water source, irrigation, fresh soil from the flooding, pottery, mud bricks. Okay, all those things work. Those are universal through all the different civilizations that we've talked about. Okay, so for bathing, these ancient civilizations, yes, they bathed, okay, but it wasn't a big part of their day-to-day life. Okay, today, most of us bathe once or twice a day. We use soap. It's just general hygiene, being clean. Back then, it wasn't that big of a deal. It wouldn't be uncommon for someone to bathe once, maybe twice a week at most. It just wasn't something that a lot of people did. If you think about it, if we're talking, people started settling next to these rivers 7,000 years ago or so. Their main priority was finding food and staying alive. How they smelled really wasn't that big of a priority. So yeah, they bathed, but it wasn't that big of a deal. Now, just like the other groups that we have talked about, it is going to be around 5000 BC is when people are going to actually settle next to these rivers. You have your Egyptians, they were probably in the 5000 BC mark as well. Your Sumerians and Mesopotamia were probably somewhere between 5000 and 7000 BC. So they're all going to start roughly within 1,000 years of each other next to these rivers. So in about 1700 BC, a group of invaders called the Shang are going to come into the river valley and establish one of the first permanent organized civilizations there. So what that means is that there were groups of people that lived there, but they either weren't organized, meaning they didn't really have a system of government, or they weren't permanent. They were back when people were still hunting and gathering. They might be there for a little while, use the river, use its resources, then move away. But this sets up the first of China's many different dynasties. Dynasty is simply where you have a family that is in charge, a family rules, and it's named after that family. Okay, so for example, if Mr. Smith was in charge, he would pass on leadership to his son. When his son passes away, it would go to his oldest son, so on and so forth. So however long the Smiths are in charge, that is the Smith dynasty. Okay, it could last anywhere from, some of these were hundreds of years long, others were as short as 15. It just kind of depended on how long and how many family members were available. All right, now this chart shows some of the different dynasties that China has had. So you're going to see the length of the dynasty kind of depends and varies. Some of these red bars are much longer than the others. So as far as how one dynasty ends and another one begins, sometimes it involves battles. One faction rises up against another, wins a war, and you've got a new dynasty in place. Other times it is simply family expansion. So maybe there wasn't a male heir to pass it to, so it went to oldest female, and obviously it took her husband's family's name, and it switches that way. So there's a lot of different ways for it to kind of pass along. But if you look, this timeline goes from roughly 2000 BC to just short of 2000 CE. So this system of dynasties where families rule over time, it's been around a long, long time. Now, in the first part of the 1200s AD, so we're talking roughly 800 years ago or so, a group of people called the Mongols are going to conquer most of China. And they're led by a man named Genghis Khan, and we'll get into greater detail with him later on. And later his grandson, Kublai Khan. But Genghis Khan is going to be one of the most ruthless, powerful conquerors who ever lived. The number of people that he and his armies are responsible for killing is just astronomical. We're talking in the millions. So, what made him and his army so powerful? Well, there's a lot of things, but really it was their use of horses. Every man in his army usually traveled with 2 horses. Obviously, if you've got an army of guys on horses, you can move fast. So they could conquer lands very, very quickly. But like I said, they'd have 2 horses so that as one got tired, they could switch and keep going. But with Genghis Khan, once he starts going around and conquering these different tribes and groups of people, he does it pretty brutally. He would usually give them the choice. They could surrender. Usually the leader of that tribe would be executed. He'd leave behind one of his men, and everyone else would live as normal. If that tribe tried to fight against him, he'd kill them all. Like, he'd completely wipe out the tribe. So the next group of people he got to, well, if you heard what he did to the group before you, odds are, what are you probably going to do? Surrender. So a lot of people did that. But Genghis Khan, like I said, he's very ruthless. Pretty vengeful person. There's another instance where he sent some traders to the Middle East to establish like a trade network. Well, the Muslim rulers of that land that he sent his traders to killed his traders. Genghis Khan gets mad, gets a group of 200,000 men together, and completely conquers this area. Every person he encounters on that journey, he kills. No one gets to surrender. No one gets a pardon. Every person he encounters, he kills. Okay? Yeah, you want to stay on his good side. Now, the other thing with Genghis Khan, the amount of land he is able to conquer is huge. Pretty much everything inside this green will be under his rule. So you've got northern part of China, parts of modern-day India, Pakistan. You've got Iraq in there. You get into modern-day Russia, Mongolia. Okay, so he's got a big chunk of this Asian continent that he's able to conquer. Now, because of that, he does have a very large family. He himself has 14 documented sons. The estimated number is much higher than that. But his children have lots of children. He has one son who has 40 children. Now, because of that, it's estimated that 1 out of every 200 men in this territory can trace their ancestry back to Genghis Khan, based on DNA results, and it's something in the Y chromosome. They've been able to figure out 1 out of every 200 men in this area are related to him.